A rancher spent years alone until a hanged Apache girl was found. He had lived on the ranch for years, longer than he could remember. The land stretched for miles in every direction, a vast and quiet world that seemed untouched by time. The rolling hills, the endless sky, and the rustling of tall grass were his only companions. No neighbors lived close by, and the nearest town was an hour's ride away on a dusty road that twisted through the open plains. The rancher had chosen this life long ago, seeking solitude and freedom, a place where no one could interfere with his work or question his choices.
At first, the isolation had been a comfort, a way to escape from the crowded, noisy world he had once known.
But over time, however, it became something more complicated. It was not only a refuge, it was a cage of silence, filled with the memories of those he had lost and the quiet weight of living alone. Every morning he rose before sunrise, the faint pink light creeping over the horizon. The cool air smelled of earth and grass, and he could hear the soft lowing of cattle as they stirred in the pastures. His routine was precise. He fed the animals, checked the fences, repaired broken gates, and rode across the land to inspect the farthest corners of the ranch. Horses, cattle, and the occasional coyote were his daily companions. Sometimes he would whistle a tune or talk aloud, just to break the stillness that pressed against him like a second skin. But though he enjoyed the work, it was the silence that was hardest to bear. There were no voices to interrupt his thoughts, no laughter, no sounds of children playing, no neighbors to share a simple greeting with. The quiet had a way of making him see things more clearly, but it also made him remember everything he had tried to forget. He thought often of his family, though they had been gone for years. The ranch had belonged to his father before him, and before that, to his grandfather. He remembered his father teaching him how to ride a horse properly, how to mend a fence, how to care for an animal that was sick or hurt. Those memories were warm and bittersweet, a reminder of love that had faded into the past. Yet even in his solitude he felt a connection to those memories. But the land itself seemed alive, holding pieces of his family's history in every tree, every stone, and every worn path where cattle had walked for generations. Walking through the ranch, he sometimes imagined his father's voice beside him, offering advice or simply sharing a quiet moment in the sun. It was in these moments that the loneliness felt heavier, pressing against him, reminding him that he was the last of his line on this land. The rancher had few distractions. There were books he occasionally read, mostly old ones he had collected over the years, stories about faraway places and people he would never meet. There was an old radio, its signal weak in the remote location, which crackled to life only sporadically with news, music, or voices that seemed distant and unreal. He rarely spoke to anyone unless necessary. Travelers or delivery drivers who passed by were few, and even they were cautious, often keeping their distance. He had learned to value his privacy, and over the years had grown accustomed to the rhythm of solitude. It was in the silence that he thought best, worked best, and even slept best, though sleep came with dreams that sometimes reminded him of the life he had left behind. Despite his isolation, he found joy in simple things. The rising sun painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and gold was a daily spectacle that never failed to fill him with awe. The sound of a stream flowing through a nearby canyon brought a sense of peace, as if the land itself whispered encouragement. Animals fascinated him. He understood them in ways few people could. He could tell when a horse was anxious, when a cow was about to give birth, or when a coyote watched silently from the edge of a hill. These small connections were his companions, his silent friends who shared his world without judgment. Even the wind became a voice, shifting across the plains, rustling the grass, and whispering stories of the land. At times he felt the weight of loneliness deeply, especially in the evenings. After a long day's work, as the sky turned dark and stars began to pierce the vast expanse above, he would sit on the porch of his small cabin, a cup of coffee in hand, listening to the quiet. The cabin was simple, filled with only what he needed: a bed, a few shelves with books and tools, and a small wood stove that kept the space warm during cold nights. Nights were the hardest. The silence became thicker, almost like a physical presence pressing against the walls. Friend. Shadows moved across the cabin as the moonlight shifted through the windows, and the rancher often found himself staring into the dark, wishing for something, though he wasn't always sure what it was he wanted. Brit. He sometimes thought about leaving, about moving closer to town, to be near people, to hear laughter and voices regularly. But the thought never lasted long. Britain desperate. The land was part of him. It had shaped him, taught him, and given him purpose. He could not imagine giving it up, even for companionship. Brit. There was a sense of pride in living here alone, surviving, and managing everything without help. He believed in his ability to endure, to face whatever came his way. Brit. And yet he could not deny the emptiness that lingered, an ache that even the beauty of the plains could not fill. The rancher was also a man of routine, almost ritualistic in the way he approached his days. But before breakfast, he would walk around the cabin, checking that everything was secure, making sure the animals were safe, and listening to the land. He took care to notice changes in the weather, the movement, clouds, and the signs in nature that indicated rain or a storm approaching. Brit. He had learned to read the land like a book, each season bringing new challenges, each day demanding attention and care. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was honest, and there was a satisfaction in working hard and seeing the results of one's labor. Brit. Yet even with all the routines and knowledge, there were moments of uncertainty. Nights were long, and the vastness of the plains sometimes reminded him of how small and fragile life could be. Brit. He often thought about what might happen if he were to fall ill or be injured. With no one close by, survival could be uncertain. Brit. These thoughts did not frighten him every day, but they lingered in the corners of his mind, reminders of the delicate balance between independence and vulnerability. Despite all this, he found a strange kind of peace in his life. Brit. The solitude forced him to confront himself, to understand who he truly was. Stripped of the distractions and noise of society, he learned patience, resilience, and a deep respect for the natural world around him. Brit. The land demanded his attention, and in return it offered him a sense of belonging, even if he was alone. Each sunrise, each breeze, each sound of an animal became part of a rhythm that grounded him, giving him both purpose and a quiet contentment. But even in this contentment, a small part of him yearned for more. He longed for connection, for someone to share the beauty and the struggles of life with. Brit. Though he rarely admitted it to himself, he missed laughter, conversation, and the warmth of human presence. Brit. Sometimes he would imagine what it would be like to sit around a fire with someone, talking, sharing stories, or simply enjoying the quiet together. These thoughts were fleeting, often chased away by the demands of work and the unending routine of ranch life. Brit. Yet they reminded him that despite years of isolation, he was still human, still capable of caring, still longing for connection. The rancher's life was simple, yet layered. Brit. Each day was filled with tasks and duties, yet also with observation, reflection, and quiet appreciation. He had everything he needed to survive, yet the absence of others weighed heavily on him at times. Brit. The land, animals, and routines were constant, but they could not replace human connection entirely. He understood this, accepted it, and yet quietly hoped for something to change, some event that might bring the unexpected into his quiet, measured life. Britain. And so, he continued, day after day, year after year, a man alone with the land, the sky, and the animals. He faced the beauty and the hardships of life with quiet strength, carrying the memory of the past and the hope of something more in the future. His life was a careful balance of solitude and survival, of labor and reflection, of memories that comforted and reminders that sometimes a man's heart longs for more than the open plains can give. Brit. Little did he know that this quiet life, shaped by years of solitude and routine, was about to change forever. Something would come into his world, unexpected and tragic. Something that would test his strength, his compassion, and his very understanding of life. The vast, lonely ranch that had been his sanctuary was about to become the center of a story that no man could have predicted. And in the stillness of the plains, as the sun rose and set, the rancher continued his work, unaware that the quiet of his life was about to be broken. The day began like any other. The rancher woke before sunrise, the soft pink glow spreading across the sky, painting the plains in gentle light. He saddled his horse, checked the fences, and prepared to ride toward the farthest corner of his land. That part of the ranch was rarely visited, a wild stretch of forested hills and narrow valleys, where the grass grew tall and the trees clustered together like a secret. It was a place he usually avoided, not because it was dangerous, but because it was quiet, in a way that made him feel even more alone. Today, though, something had drawn him there, a subtle feeling he could not ignore, a whisper of curiosity he could not shake. He rode slowly, letting the horse pick its way through the uneven terrain. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Birds crawled out from the branches above, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush reminded him that the forest was alive, alert, and watching. The rancher's eyes scanned every shadow, every movement, trained over years to notice what was out of place. He had walked these lands countless times, yet something felt different this morning, a tension in the air that he could not explain. As he moved deeper into the forest, the rancher noticed a narrow path, barely visible among the tall grass and fallen leaves. It seemed to invite him forward, as though it had appeared only for him. He dismounted, letting the horse graze nearby while he followed the trail on foot. The silence of this part of the land was heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that presses on the chest and makes every sound feel sharper. His boots crunched softly against the dry leaves, each step echoing in the emptiness around him. And then he saw it. At first he thought it might be a tree branch caught in the wind, swaying and moving. But as he drew closer, a chill ran down his spine. There, in a small clearing surrounded by tall oaks and cottonwoods, hung the figure of a young girl. She was small, no more than 13 or 14, and her body was still. The rancher froze, the wind seeming to stop as if the forest itself held its breath. For a long moment he could not speak or move.
His mind raced, a storm of confusion, fear, and sorrow. He dropped to his knees, feeling the earth beneath him, and studied the girl carefully.
She was clearly alone, and something about the stillness of her presence made him ache with an unfamiliar, heavy sadness. He had seen death before, on the ranch, in the animals that did not survive, in the harsh winters that sometimes claimed a stray horse or cow, but never like this. This was a human life, young and fragile, gone in a moment, and he felt the deep responsibility stir within him. He needed to act. The rancher quickly tied his horse to a nearby tree and ran back toward the cabin to fetch his radio and notify the authorities. His hands trembled, his heart pounded in his chest, and he struggled to focus on the simple steps he needed to take. Calling the local sheriff, he spoke in quick, clear sentences, giving the location and describing what he had found.
He knew the response would take time, but it was the right thing to do.
As he waited, he returned to the clearing, keeping his distance, unsure of what to do next. The forest seemed even quieter now, the usual rustle of animals, and the song of birds gone, as though the world had paused to honor the moment. While waiting for help, the rancher thought about the girl. Who was she? How had she come to be here? There were no signs of struggle nearby, no footprints that he could see, only the soft grass and fallen leaves disturbed by the wind. Desperate. He wondered if she had been lost or if something terrible had happened elsewhere and she had been brought here. Questions tumbled in his mind, each one heavier than the last. He could feel sorrow growing in his chest, a mixture of grief and empathy for someone he did not know but already felt connected to. Britt. When the authorities arrived, the rancher led them carefully to the clearing. The officers moved with professionalism and respect, speaking quietly to one another, examining the scene, and taking notes. Britt.
He stayed nearby, observing, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on him. As they worked, he noticed the care with which they treated the girl, covering her gently, making sure not to disturb anything unnecessarily.
Britt. There was a sense of shared understanding, an unspoken recognition that this was a tragic event that deserved respect, even in the midst of shock. Britt. The rancher spoke to the officers, answering questions and giving details about the land, the path he had found, and the area where she was discovered. He described the forest, the hills, the way the trees grew, and the unusual quiet of the morning. But he felt compelled to share everything he had seen, hoping it might help them understand how she had come to be there. As he spoke, he could feel the connection forming between himself and the people around him, strangers united by the weight of this discovery. But it was a reminder that even in his isolated life, moments like these could draw him back into the world, demanding attention, empathy, and action. The investigation that followed was thorough. But officers combed the area for clues, photographing the scene, documenting the surroundings, and speaking with the rancher about every detail he could remember. They assured him that they would do everything possible to find answers, to understand what had happened. But though he was only a witness, he felt a profound sense of responsibility, as if the girl's life and death now rested in part on his shoulders. Desperate, it was a burden he accepted silently, a new weight that he had never experienced in his long years of solitude.
As the day wore on, the rancher found himself returning repeatedly to the clearing, unable to leave entirely.
Britt. He observed the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the sunlight filtering through the branches, casting patterns on the ground. It was peaceful in a way, yet the peace was haunted, filled with the absence of a life that had been cut short.
Britt. He thought about what the girl's family might be feeling, about the fear and grief that must have accompanied her disappearance. Even without knowing her, he felt the pull of connection, a desire to honor her memory and to make sure that she was not forgotten.
Britt. That evening, the rancher sat on his porch, the events of the day replaying in his mind. The forest had returned to its usual quiet, but the weight of what had happened lingered. Britt. He sipped his coffee slowly, thinking about the girl, the fragility of life, and the responsibilities that sometimes came without warning. In the stillness of the night, he felt a mixture of sorrow, guilt, and a strange sense of purpose. Britt. This land, which had been his refuge, had now become the setting for a tragedy that he could not ignore. Sleep was difficult that night. Britt. He lay in his bed, listening to the wind and the trees, thinking about the girl and the mystery of her life. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was she, Britt? Why had she come to this place? Could anything have been done to prevent this? Britt. The rancher had spent years alone, but now the solitude felt different. It was no longer a choice. It was a backdrop to a life that had intersected with someone else's in a moment of deep tragedy. Britt. He realized that the world, no matter how far he tried to escape it, would always find a way to reach him, to remind him that he was part of something larger than himself. Britt. In the following days, the rancher continued his work, but everything had changed. The forest where the girl had been found felt different, the trees and the shadows carrying a memory that could not be erased. Britt. He spoke with the authorities when they returned, helping them retrace steps, describe the land, and consider possibilities. The community, once distant in his life, now became present, united in concern, grief, and curiosity. Britt. The rancher who had thought he had left the world behind found himself drawn into it, forced to confront emotions, responsibilities, and connections he had long avoided. The girl's presence lingered, even in her absence. The rancher found himself speaking aloud to her sometimes, telling her about the animals, the weather, and the routines of the ranch. It was not strange to him. It was a way of processing, of coping. and of acknowledging the life that had touched his own. He began to see the land differently, noticing subtle signs, patterns, and changes he had never paid attention to before. The discovery had opened his eyes, making him more aware of the fragility of life and the importance of empathy, even for those he had never known. As weeks passed, the investigation continued, and the rancher maintained contact with the authorities, offering guidance, observations, and support. Though the initial shock had faded slightly, the memory of the girl and the morning he had found her never left him. It was a turning point, a moment when his quiet, solitary life intersected with the larger world in a way that he could not have anticipated. The rancher realized that while he could live alone, life would always find a way to demand attention, care, and compassion, reminding him of the bonds that connected all humans, even across time, space, and circumstance. By the end of that first month, the rancher understood that his life had changed forever. The forest, the clearing, and the girl's memory became part of his daily existence, shaping his thoughts, actions, and even his dreams. The ranch, once a place of pure solitude, had become a place of reflection, remembrance, and responsibility. The rancher, who had believed he could live untouched by the world, now knew that no one was truly alone. Life could reach him in unexpected ways, and with that reach came a responsibility he could not ignore. And so, the rancher continued his days, tending to the land and the animals, riding across the plains and maintaining his routines. But something within him had shifted. The discovery of the young girl had awakened emotions he had long kept buried. Empathy, sorrow, and a deep desire to honor life even when it ended too soon. He knew the forest would never be the same again, nor would he. Desperate. From that day forward, every shadow, every rustle, and every beam of sunlight held new meaning. A reminder that even in the vastest solitude, life has a way of finding connection, and that even the smallest presence can leave an eternal mark on the heart of a man who thought he was alone. After the discovery of the young girl, the rancher's life began to shift in ways he had never imagined. The quiet routine that had filled his days for years was replaced with a constant hum of activity, questions, and concern. The authorities visited frequently, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, each time taking notes, asking questions, and inspecting the land. They were polite, professional, and careful, but their presence reminded him that his solitary world had changed forever. He had never interacted with the community much beyond a brief greeting at the general store or the occasional trip to town. Yet now, he was at the center of something larger, something tragic, mysterious, and demanding attention. The rancher spent hours explaining the land to the investigators, pointing out paths, hidden clearings, and the places where the girl had been found. He described the forest in detail. The thick clusters of oaks and cottonwoods, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the small stream that ran near the clearing, and even the tracks of animals he had noticed over the years. His knowledge of the land, once purely practical, now became a vital tool for the investigation. The authorities listened carefully, recognizing that the rancher's years of experience gave him insight that no map or aerial photograph could provide. Even as he cooperated with the investigation, the rancher felt the weight of the event pressing on him. Each time he returned to the clearing, he was reminded of the young girl's stillness and the mystery surrounding her death. He could not shake the feeling that he needed to do something more, to honor her life in some way, to make sure that her story was remembered. The forest that had once been a place of solitude now felt like a place of responsibility. Every tree, every shadow, every whisper of the wind carried her memory, and he could not ignore it. The rancher also began interacting with the local community more than he ever had before. News of the discovery had spread quickly, and people came to ask questions, offer condolences, or simply observe. Some were cautious, unsure how to approach him, while others expressed concern and empathy. The rancher, initially reserved, found himself talking more, listening more, and realizing that human connection, though unfamiliar and sometimes uncomfortable, was now a part of his life. He shared details about the land, the morning he had found the girl, and the way the forest seemed to hold its breath in her presence. People listened, sometimes nodding in understanding, sometimes offering their own reflections and stories. In the evenings, after the investigators had left, the rancher often walked the land alone. The forest felt different now, alive in a way he had never noticed before. Every rustle of leaves, every chirp of a bird, every ripple in the stream seemed to carry meaning.
He thought about the girl, her life, and the circumstances that might have brought her to this place.
Questions circled in his mind. Who was she? What challenges had she faced? What dreams had she held? Though he did not know the answers, thinking about them brought him closer to understanding not just her, but the larger world beyond his ranch. The rancher also began reflecting on his own life in ways he had not done before. Years of solitude had taught him independence, resilience, and patience, but they had also kept him distant from the lives of others. Now he realized that isolation had been both a refuge and a limitation. The discovery of the girl reminded him that life is fragile, interconnected, and often unpredictable. He began to see the value of empathy, community, and shared responsibility. Even though he had chosen to live alone, he now understood that no one exists entirely in isolation. Actions, decisions, and events ripple outward, affecting others in ways one may not anticipate. Over time, the rancher developed a cautious trust with some members of the community, particularly those who were connected to the investigation. They shared information, insights, and updates about the case, treating him as a partner rather than a witness. He listened carefully, asking questions, offering his own observations, and learning about the world beyond his ranch. Though he remained reserved in many ways, a new sense of connection began to take root. He realized that while solitude had shaped him, engagement with others could bring understanding, purpose, and even healing. The rancher also began to notice subtle changes within himself. He found that he thought more about the future, about the ways he could contribute positively to the lives of others, and about the lessons he could carry forward from this tragedy. The girl's presence, though brief in his life, had opened his eyes to the importance of compassion, attention, and vigilance. He paid closer attention to the animals, the land, and the people around him. He began to understand that responsibility was not only about survival, but about care, memory, and moral action. During this period, the authorities shared information about the historical context of the region, including the struggles faced by the Apache community and other indigenous peoples. The rancher listened with interest, absorbing stories of resilience, hardship, and culture that had existed long before his ranch. He realized that the young girl's life was part of a larger narrative, one that encompassed generations of people who had lived, suffered, and persevered in this land. This understanding deepened his empathy and his sense of duty, motivating him to honor her memory in ways that went beyond the immediate investigation.
The rancher also reflected on the role of justice and community in healing. He observed how local leaders, neighbors, and authorities worked together to address the situation, recognizing that tragedy could unite people in unexpected ways.
Desperate, he learned about the careful procedures investigators followed, the compassion they showed, and the patience required to pursue answers in a complex situation.
Watching their work gave him insight into the importance of fairness, diligence, and care in confronting difficult realities. Even as the investigation progressed, the rancher returned frequently to the clearing where the girl had been found. He cleared leaves and debris, repaired broken branches, and made the area respectful and clean.
This small act, simple yet meaningful, became a ritual for him, a way of acknowledging her presence, honoring her life, and creating a space where memory could exist without disturbance. The forest, once simply a part of his ranch, became a sacred place in his mind, a reminder that life, even in its fragility, deserved recognition and respect. The rancher's solitude, once a shield from the world, had now become a foundation for engagement. He found himself thinking about broader questions of life, mortality, and responsibility. He realized that his years of isolation had prepared him to act decisively, to respond calmly in a crisis, and to care deeply when needed. Yet, he also recognized that life's challenges often required connection, a shared sense of purpose and collaboration that no one could achieve alone. Through it all, the rancher maintained his daily routines, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and riding across the plains. But his perspective had changed. Every action, every observation carried a new depth of meaning. He understood that life's value was not measured solely by survival or labor, but by attention, care, and the connections formed with others, even across distance and circumstance. He began to see his ranch not only as a place of work, but as a place of remembrance, reflection, and moral responsibility. The rancher also became a source of quiet guidance for others involved in the investigation. He offered practical advice about the land, shared his knowledge of local wildlife, and provided context for the movements of people and animals across the forest.
Investigators relied on his insight, neighbors appreciated his honesty, and the community slowly came to see him as someone who, though solitary, had deep wisdom and compassion.
He began to realize that his life, once defined by distance from others, could now serve a purpose that extended beyond his personal boundaries. At night, he often sat on the porch of his cabin, looking at the stars and reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the girl, her family, the investigators, and the community. He thought about his own life, the years he had spent alone, and the ways in which this tragedy had transformed him. Though sadness remained, it was tempered by a growing sense of understanding, purpose, and connection. He knew that the world was unpredictable, that life could be brief and fragile, but that human compassion, empathy, and action could bring meaning even in difficult circumstances. The rancher also began to record his observations in a small notebook he kept by the cabin.
He wrote about the land, the forest, the clearing, and the girl. He noted changes in the seasons, animal movements, and even the progress of the investigation as shared with him by authorities.
Writing became a way to process his thoughts, to honor the life that had intersected with his, and to create a record of his reflections. These pages, filled with careful observation and empathy, became a personal chronicle of both loss and growth, a testament to the ways in which life could teach, even in the midst of sorrow.
Over time, the rancher noticed small but meaningful changes in his own behavior.
He spoke more readily with neighbors and investigators, listened with greater attention, and responded to the needs of others with care and thoughtfulness. His perspective on life had shifted. He understood the value of human connection, the importance of community, and the power of memory. The young girl, though gone, had left an imprint on his life, shaping his actions, his reflections, and his sense of responsibility. By the end of these weeks, the rancher's world had transformed. The forest, the clearing, and the ranch itself had become places of reflection, connection, and respect. He had learned to balance solitude with engagement, work with observation, and grief with empathy. Though he had once believed that he could live untouched by the world, he now understood that life reaches us in unexpected ways, teaching lessons, fostering growth, and connecting us to others, even when we least expect it. The rancher knew that his life would never return to what it had been before. The quiet plains, the rolling hills, and the vast skies would remain, but the experience of the girl's death, the investigation, and the connections formed with the community had left a permanent mark. His life, once defined by solitude, was now enriched by awareness, responsibility, and a sense of purpose that extended beyond the boundaries of his ranch. And so he continued, tending to the land, observing the forest, and maintaining his routines, but with a heart changed forever. He had learned that even in isolation, life finds ways to reach us, teaching lessons, inspiring action, and reminding us that human compassion and understanding can exist even in the most unexpected moments. Brit. The rancher, once alone, had become part of a larger story, a story of memory, empathy, and the enduring connections that define what it means to be human. The days following the discovery of the young girl became a turning point in the rancher's life. He found that he could no longer remain a silent observer. The events had drawn him into a world that was larger, more complicated, and far beyond the routines of his quiet ranch. Investigators visited often, gathering evidence, asking questions, and piecing together what they could. The rancher assisted willingly, guiding them through the forested hills, pointing out hidden trails, and describing the subtle signs of life and movement in the area. Desperate, yet as helpful as he could be, he felt the pull of something deeper. A desire to understand the girl herself, her life, and the world she had come from. It was during one of these days that a member of the Apache community visited the ranch. She was an elder, wise and gentle, with a calm presence that seemed to soften the vast open land around her. The rancher met her near the clearing where the girl had been found. Unsure of what to expect, she spoke softly, explaining that she had come to honor the girl, to learn more about what had happened, and to connect with the land where she had spent her final moments. At first, the rancher felt hesitant. He had lived a life removed from the concerns of others, and interactions beyond the authorities were rare. But there was something in her demeanor, a quiet strength and warmth, that invited trust. They walked together to the clearing, moving slowly, reverently. The elder spoke of the importance of remembering, of acknowledging the lives of those who had passed, and of caring for the land that holds memory. She explained that the girl was part of a larger community, a family network that valued connection, respect, and heritage. The rancher listened carefully, absorbing her words. Peace. He realized that the forest and the clearing were not just physical spaces. They were places of meaning, history, and emotion. Every tree, every leaf, every rustle of the wind carried echoes of life and memory. Over the following weeks, the rancher developed a relationship with members of the Apache community. He met parents, relatives, and community leaders, each visit bringing stories, traditions, and perspectives that were foreign yet deeply moving. They spoke of resilience, of survival, of hope, and of the ways the land shaped their lives. The rancher learned about the girl's life in small, careful details. Her favorite songs, her laughter, the way she had cared for younger siblings, and her curiosity about the world. Though he had never met her before, he felt connected to her, as though her spirit had touched him the moment he discovered her. He also began to help in practical ways. He offered guidance on the land, helping community members navigate the ranch safely. He assisted with searches, marking trails, clearing small paths, and observing subtle signs of movement in the forest. His knowledge of the land became invaluable, and he felt a growing sense of purpose in contributing to the efforts of justice and understanding. The rancher had spent years alone, but now he realized that his solitude had prepared him to act decisively, thoughtfully, and with care. His skills, honed over decades, were suddenly a gift to others. The investigation continued, with the rancher acting as a bridge between the authorities and the community. He relayed information, clarified details about the land, and observed interactions that might otherwise have been overlooked. His perspective, shaped by years of observation and solitude, became a unique lens through which others could see the situation more clearly. He understood that finding answers would take time, patience, and empathy, qualities he had cultivated through years of living quietly with nature.
During this time, the rancher also began to reflect more deeply on life, justice, and morality.
He realized that tragedy, while painful, could serve as a catalyst for understanding, connection, and growth. The girl's life, though short, had the power to teach him lessons about compassion, responsibility, and the importance of human bonds. He thought about the choices she might have faced, the struggles she might have endured, and the resilience she must have shown in her life. These reflections transformed his view of the world, turning what had once been simple routine and work into a richer tapestry of meaning and awareness. The rancher also became a quiet source of comfort for the Apache community. They spoke with him about their grief, their hopes, and the challenges of navigating a world that often seemed indifferent to their struggles. He listened patiently, offering practical support but also emotional presence. Though he had rarely engaged in such intimate connections before, he found that his solitude had made him a good listener, a careful observer, and a steady presence. In turn, the community began to trust him, seeing in him a man who could honor their stories and their losses with sincerity and respect. There were also moments of tension and uncertainty. The rancher sometimes struggled with the weight of responsibility, questioning whether he was doing enough or understanding enough. He worried about missteps, about miscommunication, and about unintentionally causing harm. Yet he continued, driven by a sense of duty, empathy, and growing understanding. Each visit to the clearing, each conversation with the community, each observation of the land reinforced the lesson that careful attention, patience, and respect were more powerful than speed or certainty. The rancher also learned about the history of the area, the long presence of indigenous peoples, and the challenges they had faced over generations. He listened to stories of survival, adaptation, and cultural richness, gaining a sense of the deep roots that connected people to the land. He began to see the ranch not just as his own, but as part of a larger story, one that included histories, traditions, and memories he had never considered before. This awareness brought humility, perspective, and a desire to honor the land and the lives connected to it. As the days passed, the rancher found that he was changed by these interactions. He felt a deeper sense of empathy, a greater awareness of the fragility of life, and a stronger commitment to justice and care. He realized that solitude, while valuable, could never replace the richness of connection and shared experience. By opening himself to the community, he discovered new dimensions of life, learning that even small acts of compassion, attention, and service could have profound impact. The rancher also observed how the community supported one another, the way they maintained traditions, told stories, and cared for their young and elderly. He saw the importance of memory, rituals, and shared history in shaping identity and resilience. The girl's life, though tragically short, became a focal point for these lessons. Remembering her, honoring her, and assisting in the investigation allowed him to participate in a process that transcended personal grief and touched something universal: the need for empathy, justice, and human connection. Over time, the rancher developed a routine that included more than work on the ranch. He spent mornings tending to animals and fences, as always, but afternoons were often dedicated to the clearing, the forest, and visits with the Apache community. He learned small details about plants, trails, and patterns in the forest that were meaningful to them. He participated in quiet ceremonies of remembrance, helped guide investigations respectfully, and acted as a liaison between different groups involved. Though these activities required patience and humility, the rancher felt a growing sense of purpose, a fulfillment he had never known during his years of solitude.
Evenings on the ranch became times of reflection.
The rancher would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills, thinking about the girl, the community, and the lessons he had learned. He realized that the discovery had not only brought grief, but had also opened a doorway to growth, understanding, and human connection. He reflected on the value of listening, observing, and acting with care, understanding that life's complexities required more than knowledge. They required empathy and respect for the stories of others. The bond between the rancher and the Apache community deepened gradually. He attended gatherings, listened to stories, and offered what help he could, always with humility and attention. He learned that while he could never fully understand the experiences of the girl or her community, he could honor them by observing, caring, and acting responsibly. The rancher's life, once defined by isolation and routine, had become intertwined with a larger narrative, one that demanded compassion, courage, and connection. Through these experiences, the rancher began to see his life, his land, and his routines differently. The ranch, once a place of solitude and work, had transformed into a space of reflection, memory, and moral responsibility. He understood that the forest, the clearing, and even the paths worn by animals and humans carried meaning far beyond what he had ever imagined. Each day offered opportunities to observe, learn, and act, and he embraced them with dedication, patience, and empathy. By the end of this period, the rancher had undergone a profound transformation.
He was no longer simply a man who lived alone on his land. He had become a bridge between worlds, a partner in understanding and a witness to life, loss, and memory.
The young girl's presence, though brief, had reshaped his perspective, teaching him lessons about compassion, responsibility, and the enduring importance of human connection. The rancher's life continued on the ranch, as it always had, but now it was layered with meaning, connection, and reflection. He worked the land, tended the animals, and maintained his routines, but his heart and mind were engaged with the larger world. He understood that life is fragile, that memories matter, and that even in solitude one can participate meaningfully in the lives of others. The young girl had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder that every life matters, and that the smallest presence can inspire the greatest change in a heart that is willing to see, listen, and act. And so, the rancher carried on, forever changed, forever connected, and forever aware that life, even in its most painful and mysterious moments, offers lessons, growth, and the chance to make a difference. His solitude had ended, not with noise or chaos, but with understanding, respect, and a quiet dedication to life, memory, and compassion. Life on the ranch had changed forever, but the days of quiet routine, of solitude and endless open plains, had shifted into something more complex, more human, and more meaningful. The rancher now moved through his land with a sense of purpose that went beyond caring for animals or repairing fences. But clearing in the forest, once simply part of his property, had become a place of memory and reflection. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle in the wind carried with it the memory of the young girl whose life had touched his so deeply. He often found himself walking the paths that led to the clearing, carefully tending to the area to ensure it remained respectful and undisturbed. Small gestures, clearing fallen branches, arranging stones neatly, and marking the trail for others who wished to visit, became acts of care and remembrance. It was not only for the girl, but for the land itself, which had witnessed her final moments. Through these efforts, the rancher felt a sense of connection that had been missing from his life for decades. The land, once a place of isolation, had become a bridge between him and a larger, shared humanity. The rancher's relationship with the Apache community continued to grow. He visited regularly, sharing stories of the land, listening to their memories of the girl, and learning more about their traditions. He was present at gatherings and ceremonies of remembrance, participating with humility and respect. He learned the importance of oral history, of preserving stories, and of honoring those who had passed through actions as simple as listening, caring, and remembering. These interactions filled a part of him that had long been empty, offering companionship, understanding, and a sense of shared purpose that solitude alone could never provide. Despite the sadness that lingered, there were moments of light. The rancher found comfort in seeing how the community supported one another, how they honored their history, and how they maintained hope even in the face of grief. He observed children playing in the open spaces, elders sharing stories by firesides, and neighbors helping one another through small acts of kindness. These moments reminded him of the beauty of human connection and of the ways life continues even after tragedy. He began to appreciate that memory, empathy, and compassion could coexist with the hardships of the world, and that his own life could now be a part of that balance.
The investigation into the girl's death continued, though answers were not always immediate.
But the rancher remained patient, understanding that some mysteries could not be solved quickly or easily. But he contributed when he could, offering guidance, insight, and observations about the land, but he also learned the value of trust, trusting that the authorities, the community, and time itself would gradually bring clarity. But through this process, he realized that life often required patience, that justice was a careful and sometimes slow process, and that even in uncertainty, one could act with care and integrity.
As the seasons changed, the rancher's perspective on his land shifted as well.
But winter brought snow that blanketed the hills, transforming the familiar terrain into a quiet, white expanse. Spring returned with new growth, the sound of streams swelling with melted snow, and the first blooms of flowers in hidden corners of the forest. But each change reminded him of life's cycles, its fragility, and its resilience. He began to see the ranch not just as a place of work or refuge, but as a living, breathing part of a broader story, one that connected past, present, and future in subtle and meaningful ways. But the rancher also spent time reflecting on himself. Years of solitude had given him resilience, patience, and the ability to observe the smallest details, but they had also limited his connections with others. But now he understood that life was richer when shared, that purpose could be found not only in labor and routine, but also in empathy, engagement, and care for others. Rask, the memory of the girl, her life, and the way she had unknowingly drawn him into the world beyond his ranch had transformed his understanding of what it meant to live fully, to act with responsibility, and to honor the lives of those around him. Even at night he found new meaning. He glances around in desperate distinction. The color of tar is stretching, disturbed, the stars stretching across the wide sky. He would think about the girl, the community, and the lessons he had learned. Bert. He thought about the ways in which life could intersect unexpectedly, how a single event could shift a life from isolation into purpose, and how empathy and action could ripple outward, touching lives in ways one could never anticipate. He felt gratitude for the chance to have been part of something so profound, for the opportunity to honor a life that had ended too soon, and for the connection he had found with a community he had once barely known. The rancher also recognized that grief and memory were not limited to human life alone. The land itself held stories, and caring for it became part of his responsibility. He observed the animals with renewed attention, noting changes in behavior, health, and movement. He watched the streams, the trees, and the fields with a mindfulness that was both practical and reverent. Every detail became a lesson in patience, observation, and respect. The rancher had always worked the land, but now he understood that his labor could be an act of tribute, a way of preserving memory and honoring life in its many forms. But as weeks turned into months, the rancher found that his solitude had not disappeared entirely, but it had been transformed. He still cherished quiet moments alone, the vast skies, and the rhythmic tasks of ranch life. Yet these moments were now enriched by the awareness of connection, memory, and purpose. He had learned that solitude and community were not opposites, but complementary parts of a full life, one that allowed reflection, care, and engagement to coexist. The rancher had discovered that being alone did not mean being disconnected, and that connection could be found even in the quietest, most unexpected places. He also began to see the long-term impact of his actions. The clearing, the paths, and the small rituals of remembrance had inspired others in the community. Families visited, pausing to honor the girl, leaving small tokens of respect, and quietly reflecting on life, loss, and memory. The rancher observed these visits with humility, understanding that his efforts had created a space where grief and remembrance could be shared, and where healing could begin. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that even in the midst of tragedy, positive action could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that were quiet, yet profound. The rancher's relationship with the Apache community became a lasting part of his life, Britt. He continued to participate in ceremonies, share knowledge about the land, and support their efforts to preserve history and culture. In turn, the community welcomed him, appreciating his presence, his humility, and his dedication to honoring the girl's memory. Britt, he realized that trust and connection are earned through consistent care and respect, and that true understanding requires both listening and action. Through this exchange, he found a sense of belonging that had eluded him for decades of solitude. Britt. Over time, the rancher reflected on the changes within himself. The discovery of the girl, the interactions with the community, and the responsibilities he had embraced had reshaped his understanding of life. Britt. He recognized that compassion, empathy, and attention to detail were as important as work, routine, or survival. He had learned that even small acts, clearing a path, listening to a story, offering guidance, could carry profound significance. Britt. Life, he realized, was measured not only in years or tasks completed, but in the ways one touched the lives of others, honored memory, and contributed to the world. Breaths. As the story of the girl's discovery slowly became part of local history, the rancher carried her memory quietly in his heart. Her life, though brief, had changed him profoundly. He understood that life is fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes painful, but also rich with opportunities for connection, understanding, and purpose. The rancher had learned that grief could inspire action, that memory could foster meaning, and that even in the vastest isolation, one could find community, empathy, and growth. Even as time passed, the rancher continued his routines, riding across the plains, tending to the cattle, and maintaining the ranch, but now each day carried a layer of reflection and care that had not existed before. The clearing in the forest, the trails, and the land itself became symbols of responsibility, memory, and life's interconnectedness. He had learned that existence is not measured solely by solitude or survival, but by the way one engages with the world, honors life, and acts with empathy. The rancher also thought about the future. Though the girl's life had ended tragically, her story had inspired him to live differently, to see beyond himself, and to recognize the power of human connection. He made quiet plans to continue caring for the land, preserving memory, and supporting the community. He understood that his role was not to solve all mysteries or prevent all tragedy, but to act responsibly, honor life, and contribute positively wherever he could. In the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky filled with stars, the rancher felt a sense of peace. It was not the same peace he had known in his years of solitude, but a deeper, more meaningful peace, one that came from understanding, empathy, and purpose. The girl's life had touched him, taught him, and transformed him, reminding him that even in tragedy there is opportunity for growth, connection, and enduring care. The rancher had been alone for many years, but he was no longer isolated in the true sense. He had discovered that life's meaning is often found in unexpected intersections, in moments of responsibility and compassion, and in the courage to act when faced with tragedy. The young girl's memory had opened his heart, strengthened his character, and reshaped his understanding of life, solitude, and community. And so, he continued, riding across the plains, tending the ranch, caring for the land and honoring memory, forever changed, forever connected, and forever mindful that life, even in its quietest and most isolated corners, holds lessons, opportunities, and the chance to make a difference. His world had expanded beyond the boundaries of his property and his solitude, enriched by empathy, responsibility, and the enduring impact of a life that, though brief, had left a permanent mark on his heart.